Right, boys, do you ever come away from a conversation with somebody new and think, wow, I'm really boring and uninteresting in comparison to this person. Their life sounds really cool. That's with somebody new. And then with somebody that you know quite well, it will be like, damn, you tell me the same stories every time and you just don't care about me. You literally know nothing about me, but you tell me the same stuff. I know everything there is to know about you multiple times. If that's the case, chances are a lot of the conversations you have on a daily basis will be like this. And it's because people don't know how to have conversations and they're just reaffirming their own ego. So I read in the book How to Win Friends and Influence People that everybody wants to feel important. We're all here on this earth and we want to feel like we matter. Everyone has that. That's an innate need to feel important. And what you'll find with a lot of your conversations, especially if the person's not very good at having conversations, is they're just reaffirming their own ego. So with somebody new, they'll feel the need to tell you, I did this, I do this for a living, I'm a fireman, I've been doing it for 25 years, this is why I'm important. I've been on this holiday, I've been here, I've been there, look at all the accolades and interesting things, I'm noteworthy and mentionable. So that might be a new conversation, will be like just somebody telling you all these things. And then with somebody you're familiar with, say it's somebody you work with, they'll tell you the same things over and over. And it will be like, you've heard them all before and you think, why are you still telling me this? Because I already know. I know you as a fireman for 25 years. And it's because they're holding on to their own ego, their construct of themselves, because they're not a fireman, they're a person in reality stood in front of you. The fireman is a story they tell themselves. I mean, they might have done it for 25 years, but they may not be a fireman now in this moment. In this moment, we're on a dog walk or we're at work and we're doing a different job. You're not a fireman right now. So they're running a script to keep their own identity intact. And you'll find this. So I would make this mistake. In the beginning, when I'd go on dates, there was this one girl that I was interested in, and I'd ask her, oh, what have you been up to? And she'll say, oh, I've been here. There'll be a couple of months in between when I would see her last, sort of thing. And she'd be like, she's been to 3 different countries in the time. So she'd be like, oh, I went to Poland, I went to wherever, here and here, I've done this, I bought this new car, I got this new, whatever it is, there's loads of things, there's 10 different things she's told me. And then you feel or at least at the time, I felt like, oh, I've got to compete with that, to sound as interesting as her, because that's very interesting, a lot of things. I feel like I've got to say, I hadn't been to 3 different countries, I hadn't bought a new car, do you know what I mean? How do I compete with that? I'm like, and then I think, well, I come away from that conversation feeling like I'm boring and I'm not very interesting. But that's not the case. The thing is, and I'll talk about when you're on a date anyway, you shouldn't be telling the person what you've been up to, really. It kills mystery and they don't really care. So the moral of the story is, nobody actually cares about your story. And this is why. It's because they're just trying to make themselves feel important and reaffirm their own ego. And if you actually want to be good at conversations, don't do that. Nobody cares where you've been on holiday, what tattoos you've got, what car you've bought. They want to tell you about those things about themselves. And they completely miss the point because they already know those things about themselves, just like you do. You know where you've been on holiday, you know what tattoos you've got. And for you to re-say it, you're not gaining any value. But if you ask the other person about their experience, you can learn from all of it. So don't just run the script. Every time you meet a new person, don't just run the script. Just be in the present moment and let that kind of guide the conversation. So to give you kind of an example, well, to give you the answer, the actionable step, there's 2 things. To be interesting, be interested. And this kind of goes against logic. You think, to be interesting, I've got to tell a bunch of stories about a bunch of interesting things. So to do that, you have to have had interesting stories in your life. And that's not the case. You could live a very simple life, which is you wake up, you spend an hour reading, you go to work, you walk around in this woods, and then you go to sleep. You could do that for 50 years and still be a very interesting person. And then you could have the person that goes to Vegas once a year, they go backpacking across Bali or whatever it is, and they could be uninteresting, and it's because of this conversation technique. It's not even a technique, it's just how you have conversations. So the key point is, to be interesting, be interested. And the way you do that is be interested in the person you're talking to. Don't just run the script of, I went to Bali, I did this, I did that. That's uninteresting. And it doesn't make much sense. You think, oh, I just tell interesting stories. And then the second point is, the person that asks the most questions controls the conversation. So, and that's a form of being interested. To ask a question, you've got to be interested. But the key is you've actually got to genuinely be interested. If you're just waiting for the bit of the conversation where you get to tell the person what you've been doing and why you're so interesting and important, that's not going to work. So actually adopt this as a mindset in conversations. And I do this now. I go in with the frame of, I already know my story, so to say it out loud, I'm not going to gain anything from that. If they ask me, I can tell them what I've been up to and who I am as a person. But really, I can gain value. So this is like a selfish thing. I can gain value by asking them who they are, what do they do, what lessons have they learned. And every conversation, somebody else has had full life experiences that you can learn from. And you'll think, oh, well, they don't want to just talk about themselves. And this is the point. They do. Everybody wants to talk about themselves because it reaffirms their own ego. It gives them a sense of who they are. And a lot of people are quite attached to their own identity of themselves. There's like a Zen, I think it's Zen, where they say, die before you die. It's like a philosophical thing. I die on a daily basis. So like spiritually and egoically. So I'm never the same person. So I haven't got anything to hold on to. I'm always new. Whereas people think they attach themselves to the story. I'm Connor Woodman. I'm a fireman. I've been doing it for 25 years. And I ride motorbikes. I'm not a fireman, by the way. I do ride motorbikes. But that's their identity. And even when they retire from being a fireman, they still tell everyone that they was a fireman for 25 years. So they're holding on to it. Now, boring conversations are when two people with solid identities just want to reaffirm their identities to each other. And I made this mistake when I would first go on dates. I'd go on a date and I'd like ask a question or be like, oh, how's your day been? And then what have you been up to recently or whatever. And the person would tell me all these interesting things. I went here, I went there, I did this, I did that, bought a new car. Loads of interesting things. And you feel like, oh, now it's my turn in the conversation. If I haven't done all of those things, or at least a comparable amount of interesting things, I'm screwed. And that's not the case. You learn the dynamic of a date anyway. This is like a different topic, but when you're dating somebody, especially as a man, you want the woman to talk for like 3/4 of the time, and then you say very little. And you might think, oh, well, they'd get bored of that. But they will come away from that conversation thinking it was a great conversation because they spoke a lot. And that's a weird thing. People kind of judge a conversation based on how much they talk. And if you don't mind listening, then it's perfect. But if you're trying to reaffirm who you are, tell them your identity and your ego, that's when people come away and it's a crap conversation. So I've used this I do this in every conversation now, and I can quickly identify whether that person has something to say or they're just running the script that they tell to everybody. And they will say, if you worked with them, you'd hear this like every day that you're at work. But I've used this with like job interview. This is just how good conversations go. So it's not like a technique that you employ, but I have it in job interviews. Very rarely does a job interview go bad for me because I'm basically interviewing the interviewer. So I had this one job It was just after that thing. I don't know if we can say this on YouTube anymore, but it was just after that thing, that flu that shut the world down. And I was applying for a delivery job. And I went in, and the interviewer, I was like called into the office, and the interviewer was sat there. And the first thing he said was, "Excuse the messy office. I've just come here from another job. Like I was manager of whatever, and now I work here, so I haven't sorted the office out yet." Now most people would sit and go, "Oh, okay," and then wait for the questions to come. And I was like, "Oh, what made you change from that job? Like, why did you leave being a manager there, and what drew you to this job?" And people love talking about themselves and feeling important. So he spent about 10 minutes telling me why he left that job and come to this one. And I was like, and I was genuinely interested. Like, I asked him because I did wonder. It seemed like a good job. There must have been something bad about that one that drew him to here. And then he told me, and then it like led on to the next question. He's like, "Yeah, and it's a challenge because this place has been losing money. So I've kind of come in to try and make it be more profitable." So I said, "Oh, what things are you going to implement? What things have you come in and thought, oh, this is probably why," because you must have an idea. This is a challenge that you're accepting, and you obviously know you're the man for the job. And then he really wanted to tell me. He was like, "Oh yeah, I just know that the deliveries aren't any good. So if I can sort the deliveries out, that'll fix everything. And the way I'm going to do that is by implementing this." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. Like, how did you come up with that? Have you had to do that in another business?" And he did. Do you know what I mean? So I just, on and on, I was just asking him these questions. Like 45 minutes has gone by, and this is technically my interview. I know everything about this guy and how he's going to run this business and why he's in this job, and even his family. It's closer to his family, so he doesn't have to drive. Do you know what I mean? I've learned all these things about this guy. And then at the end of the conversation, he goes, "Oh, have you got any experience with this?" It was only a delivery job, and I was like, "Yeah, I've delivered for this company and that company, and had my driving, like whatever." And then he was like, "Oh yeah, you seem like the person for the job," because he's just spent 45 minutes of having a really good conversation. I happen to have a driving license. That's pretty much all that qualified me for this job, but he had a good conversation. Compare that to the next guy that comes in and sits there nervously when the guy says, "Oh, my office is messy because I'm a new manager here." They just sit quietly and it's awkward. But I just had a great conversation with the guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I want to offer you the job." They just offer you the job straight, like on the spot. And this has been the case for me every job interview I've gone for, that I actually want the job. I just do that. I just ask them about themselves. And as much as the questions they're asking me, I'll ask them. And there's normally a bit in an interview where they'll say, "Have you got any questions?" And I've already asked them like way in advance anyway. But I will always ask questions and ask them like you're interviewing them, whether it fits you. Anyway, that's job interview. And it's the same with, so the lesson there is, the person that asks the questions has control of the conversation. And in interviews, the interviewer normally asks the questions, so they hold the power, and you don't want it to be that way. You want to ask questions. So I hope that makes sense. And it's the same with dates, right? When you're on a date, you feel like you've got to impress the person. It's kind of like, I've got to show them that I'm an interesting person. And that would be a lot of talking and a lot of telling them why you're cool, basically. And that's not the case. Ask them questions. Ask them why they're interesting. And them speaking about that will make them very attracted to you. So I tend to go a bit autistic on things. So don't just be like an interviewer. Don't just go on a date and be like, "How was your day?" And then listen to the answer, "What are you going to do later?" And then listen to the answer, "What are you doing tomorrow?" Like, it gets a bit robotic. So you've got to add humour into it. So when I was in the job interview, he said something. He's like, "Oh, this is what I'm going to do." And then he said, "This is what I'm going to do to improve the deliveries." And then I was like, "And if it doesn't work, you'll be applying for jobs just like me." Like, as a joke. So you've got to use humour, and don't just be like, "Oh, that's good." Don't be a yes man, do you know what I mean? Don't just agree with everything. So when you're talking to people, ask questions, be genuinely interested, and then you can learn from all of those experiences that they've got. So that's how you have genuinely interesting conversations, and it's in the present moment, so everybody reverts back to their ego story, and you want to try and avoid that. And it's very difficult when you're having a conversation with someone who's just always reaffirming their ego. It's very repetitive and the same, but you want to be present, and you can't really have conversations with people like that, or just be so present that they recognize that they're telling you the same thing over and over. But that's something they have to address and figure out. But when you're having conversations, be interested, and when people ask you, you'll know whether they're genuinely interested or not. And you'll find this, whenever I'm speaking to women, or I'm interested in somebody or going on a date, before I used to feel like they were bored because my story was boring. But now I'll ask them a question and they'll tell me, and then because it's polite, they'll ask me, oh, so what have you been up to? Or if I ask them about a holiday, oh, where have you been? It literally takes 4 seconds for them to not care, and it's not their fault. Everybody's just trying to feel important. But I used to think, oh, they're bored, I need to make the story more interesting, make it more engaging. But that's not the case. What I will do then, I'll see their eyes glaze over, and then I'll wrap the story up really quick, and then ask them another question. So what did you eat when you was whatever? And I'll notice their interest will peak again. So I got it completely wrong. I thought my stories were uninteresting, so I got to up the levels. But I'd even find it, recently I tested this out. I bumped into somebody that I hadn't seen for a while in the gym, and I'd been to Turkey within the week that I hadn't seen them, well, a couple of weeks. So I was like, right, I'm going to tell her what I've been up to and see if she's interested. And some quite crazy things happened while I was in Turkey, these tourist pirate ships caught fire. It was pretty crazy. So I would tell the story. So these are engaging, interesting things. I could see her eyes just glaze over, and I wrapped the story up, and I was like, oh, so what have you been up to? Let her talk for half an hour, and it's a great conversation according to her. And me, because I get to learn about what she's been up to. I already know that I went to Turkey and the boats caught fire, so I'm not going to gain anything from that. So if anything, it's beneficial for other people to learn this, because they can learn from your experience. So yeah, that's the lesson. To be interesting, be interested, and the person that asks the most questions controls the conversation. So that's the actionable step. And just be mindful while you're having the conversation. Be mindful of who's got the power in this conversation. And it's not like a power trip, but who's learning the most about the other person. And another reason this works on the date kind of setting is because it creates mystery. When you start talking about, oh yeah, I went to Turkey and the pirate ship caught fire, but anyway, what did you eat when you went to Egypt? Because I heard you can't get steak out there or whatever. They're thinking, well, the pirate ship, they won't think of it in the moment, but when they go home that night, they'll be thinking, wait, did he say the pirate ship caught fire? Why didn't he tell me about that? And then they would have the questions. And you'd think you'd get those questions next time you see the person, but you don't, because they're still back on the whole affirm their own ego. So for example, I've said this to somebody. I was planning on going to Amsterdam, and the Amsterdam trip ended up being a Turkey trip. And I'd said to them, oh yeah, I'm planning on going to Amsterdam on these dates. The next time I saw the person, I'd been to Turkey, and they didn't even ask, oh, did you go to Amsterdam? They didn't ask, because they're not interested. So yeah, don't feel the need to tell everybody amazing stories about why you're interesting. I could literally live the most boring life, or simple life, and make it interesting by being interested in the other person. So I hope that makes sense. And yeah, just let me know, have you noticed this in your conversations? People don't actually care. People aren't interested in your story or your ego. Just be present. And it comes back to presence and genuinely being interested. And that's just a curiosity that you have in life. That's how you carry yourself. Chop wood, carry water. See you tomorrow. Have a good day.